Hey, welcome everyone to the From the Shadows podcast. I am your host, Shane Grove. And before we get into tonight's episode, I just want to remind everybody that if you want to find us or contact us on Facebook, you can find us at From the Shadows podcast. You can find us at After the Shadows on Facebook, which is our forum page. You can find me on Instagram at Shane Grove Author. You can find the podcast at From the Shadows Podcast on Instagram, or you can go to the website fromtheshadowspodcast.com, hit the contact button, send me an email, especially if you want to share like your own experience. And, if you want to come on the show and share your experience, we'd love to hear from you. Any of those ways you can get a hold of us. Send us a message or an email. And then if you're looking for extra content, you can't get enough, go to our Patreon, From the Shadows Podcast Patreon. There's our episodes get up on there commercial free, get up there early, and there's some extra content every once in a while, so you can go check that out. So I'm kind of excited to bring today's guest on, because I'm just going to tell everybody this is going to be part one of two, because this guy has stories for days. Stories for days. And when I ask a good friend of mine, Mary Fabian, who heads the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Project Facebook page, this is the guy, she said, because you need to talk to Dave. Dave has got some great stuff. And so I reached out to Dave, and Dave, welcome to the From the Shadows podcast.
Thank you for having me, Shane.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I've got to know you a little bit over a couple of conversations, and I can't wait for you to share some of this stuff with our listeners. So even though you're in Pennsylvania now, you started off an Ohio guy. You started off up around Cleveland, right?
I grew up in the city of Lorraine, and I worked there my whole working life. And I had a lot of relatives in the southern part of Lorraine County, rural part of Lorraine County, down there the area is just like 2 miles from the southern part of the county and like a mile from the Huron County to the west in this area. I'm trying to remember the township names 40 years ago. Anyways, that's where we started out with our running into these creatures back then in 1974 when I was 16. So I'm older than dirt. We started out there, and for about from 74 to 76, I was a young teenager, and we chased these things around, and we had a great time. And we didn't know what they were back then. We still don't know exactly what they are now, but it was pretty exciting tracking these things. And my first 2 sightings in Ohio were in the clear. I know what I was looking at. We tracked them. We found their scat, poop, whatever you want to call it, beds, hair, you name it. We found it, and it was quite exciting as a kid, even as an adult. But that's where I got into it. If you run into anybody that I went to school with, they're the same. They'll tell you I'm the crazy Bigfoot guy, and been that way since 1974. So,
at least you're consistent, right? The consistency.
The early experience, being a hunter and fisherman and trapper and all that mountain man stuff, I know what I was looking at, and I know what I was tracking, and I know what I was finding. And me and my family members and a couple of my friends were involved, and it was just totally unbelievably earth-shattering to me to actually run across these things. Before then, I only read about books, and probably the earliest, I'll probably start off with the early family story, the first time anybody in our family ever ran into these things. And that was during World War II in Tennessee. And my mom's side of the family started out as coal miners. And so basically what happened was my grandfather came over on the boat from Poland, and he was his brother sponsored him and brought him up, and his brother was working in the coal mines of West Virginia. So my grandfather was supposed to go down in the coal mines. And so he goes to go in the coal mines, up comes the elevator, and there's a guy about 2 feet tall, with his arms out to the side, and the arms are still shaking. This guy just got squashed flat by a cave-in. And my grandfather looked at that and told his brother, he says, I ain't going down there. He says, well, I got a family and I'm just barely keeping my head above water. You're going to have to find a job, do something. So my grandfather was a trained violin maker when he was over in Poland as a kid. And when he left, the guy that he made violins, his mentor, gave him actually a Stradivarius violin. So that's when my grandfather took his violin and basically played fiddle at weddings and honky tonks and stuff. And he worked his way up as a young man and saving money. His goal was to get enough money to go to trade school to become a machinist, and which he did. Fast forward to World War II, he's working in the Cleveland area at a place called, I think it was Horsburgh and Scott or Warner and Swayze, one of those big places over there. And he was too old to be, when they did the draft for the older guys in World War II. But he was approached and he says, you're the master machinist here at this shop. We have an offer for you. Would you like to come work for us? This is how much money you're going to make, which was a lot more money actually than he was making for the private company. And you're going to come down to our secret plant in Tennessee and work there. And basically he built the first 3 atomic bombs. He was a chief metal finisher on that Manhattan project. So he moved my grandmother down there and my mom. And my mom basically grew up during the World War II years living in the hills of Tennessee. And what ended up happening, my uncle came along. My grandmother's living in a tar paper shack in the middle of nowhere. My grandfather worked at the secret city there at Oak Ridge. And my uncle was on his way. And my grandmother says, if you don't have a house for me by in a few months before winter sets in, I'm out of here. So grandpa took and sold his Stradivarius and he bought a farm. So my grandmother's people, who were coal miners, she called them and said, hey, I got this 500-acre farm. I can't run it myself. Come on up here. So her brothers and her father and her mother showed up on the farm, taking care of the place. My grandfather would come home on weekends to visit. I think it was every other weekend he got to come home. So anyways, they're there at this farm in Tennessee. Something killed a yearling calf. And according to my grandfather, when he viewed the body, it looked like something bashed in the head. This is a real rocky area. And he was thinking that it had to be a rock. But my great grandfather, who was who actually came from Russia, he was Russian. I can't remember the term. One of those guys who ride around on the horses, Cossack. He was a Cossack. And so he was kind of a wild, woolly guy himself. He looked at the tracks and he thought these were a giant bear track. So he thinks this bear somehow killed this cow. So in his experience in the old country, once bears started killing cows, they never stopped. So we have to kill this bear. So my great uncle and my great grandfather were keeping an eye on this bear carcass. Grandfather comes home for the weekend. What's going on? Oh, we had a bear kill a cow and we're on bear patrol. So they're sitting on the back porch in the evening just listening because it was only about 100 yards from the house where this cow was laying up on this hillside. And it was around midnight or so, and they hear something up there ripping at the carcass. And I'm like, oh, the bear's back. So my grandfather, who had his, I believe he was a White Russian, which means that he fought for the Tsar during when the Tsar was disposed of back then. So he had his 44 Smith & Wesson Russian revolver that he brought over. And so my great grandpa had his 44, and my Uncle Stanley was armed with a double barrel 12 gauge. And then my grandfather, who really wasn't a hunter, he was kind of he never really got into hunting, a little bit of farming, but not into hunting. So he was the light man. Now, back in 1944, or whenever this happened, flashlights were really not any good. So they had a miner's carbide lamp. So they lit the carbide lamp, stuck it in the bucket, and they're sneaking up the trail, sneaking up on whatever this thing is eating at this carcass. And so when they got up there, Grandpa's job was, great grandpa was going to say, now my grandfather was going to pull the carbide light out of the bucket to spotlight the animal, and then my uncle and my great grandpa were going to unload on it. So this was their battle plan. So they go sneaking up there, and this thing's just really ripping this thing apart. So they get up there, and they get, from what I understand, was 30 or 40 feet away from this carcass. And my great grandpa said, now, Grandpa pulls the light out of the bucket. What they thought was a bear at the time stood up, was towering over them. My grandfather said it had to be 7 or 8 feet tall, was looking at them. Blood and gore all over its face, on its chest and its arms. You can see the blood glistening. And then my grandfather and my great uncle were supposed to shoot when the guns got lit up, but they were so awed to what they were looking at. And my great grandfather said, shoot. And when he spoke, this thing screamed. And it screamed like a woman's shriek. And it was so loud that my grandfather said, like somebody slapped you in the face. It was really loud and very shocking, because for one thing, they still thinking for years, the story was the bear that ran like a man and screamed like a woman. That was the story. And so it screamed, and it startled all of them. Nobody shot, neither my great uncle nor my grandfather. And the thing turned and ran. And my grandfather said it was gone in like 2 steps. It was just running from the woods across the open field, and was just gone. So that's what they saw. And my grandfather said, why didn't you shoot? And of course, my uncle says, well, why didn't you shoot? But they were so dumbfounded. So then that was the family story. Fast forward, 1968, I'm like 10 years old. I like hunting and fishing and stuff, but I also liked reading. And I was, cruising around the library one time, and the city library. And I went into the magazine section, just looking around, and I see this, I believe it was Argosy magazine. And on its cover, it had a picture of Patty, the famous Gimlin and Bigfoot. And I said, wow, I wonder if this is what Grandpa and great grandpa and Uncle Stanley saw. I'm looking at this. And at the time, you couldn't take the periodicals, the magazines, out of the library. You had to leave them there. So the first thing I did, I got out of there, and I had my mom, because the library was across town. I says, can you stop over at the bookstore? And I went over to the bookstore, and I bought a copy of this Argosy magazine. And it was a holiday, Thanksgiving or Christmas, I don't remember which. And I had this magazine. I says, I think this is what they seen back then. So I took that magazine. Of course, my grandfather passed before I was born, but great grandfather passed before I was born. But my great uncle was alive then. And so we're there at Thanksgiving, and I pull out this magazine. I said, Grandpa, look at this. And he's looking at it, and he's reading about it. He called my Uncle Stanley over. He says, look, that's what this thing was. So that was the first family experience that anybody in my family ever had with a Sasquatch. So that would be, down south at that time, they would call them a wild man or wild woman. Bigfoot wasn't coined actually until, late 1960s, 1968, 69. So that's how I was kind of introduced. So then had this thing on my mind. So in 1974, 16 years old, and me and my friend and my brother and my father are hunting out on my cousin's farm in southern Lorraine County. And so we're on the main line tracks that come from, God, I can't remember. It's just east of New London, Ohio, and the main line that goes through there. And I'm trying to remember the name of the little town, and I can't think of it. I don't know if you can edit this. I'm going to yell at my wife. Is that okay?
No, it's okay. You don't have to. You don't have to yell at
I'm
your
going to
wife.
get the name of the town. I'm going to have her bring my Ohio maps down.
Oh, jeez.
Whatever. But anyways, well,
I'll look. I'll look while you're talking. I'll see if I can.
there's some people out there that live in that area. My brother lives out in that area, and they're still having Bigfoot stuff going on today. Just east of New London, and I can't remember the name of the town, little town, but it's on the main line there. I think it was in Norfolk, Western.
Are you talking about Wellington or Sullivan or Nova?
Keep on going south.
Savannah, Polk.
No, was on Route 58 back then. God, Griggs Road. If you got a county map in front of you, you'll see southern Lorraine County, and they'll see Griggs Road, and you follow Griggs Road over from Orphanage Road, and it goes right into this little hamlet there. There used to be a grain elevator there. It's no longer there, but anyways. So we're hunting on the tracks like a mile and a half west of that little town between there and New London. And we got there. My cousin who owned the farm says, "Hey, watch out for the big hairy guy." I said, "What big hairy guy?" "We call him Harry." I said, "Okay. So what are we looking for?" He says, "Oh, you'll know when you see him, if you see him." Because all the farmers around there were seeing this thing. And so we're on the railroad tracks. We're woodchuck hunting. Hunting with a 22 caliber revolver. I have a 22 rifle strapped on my back. I'm walking along this railroad line, looking down the woodchuck holes, because sometimes the woodchucks just sit there and stare out at you, and it's an easy shot. And just take your handgun and shoot them, and you got yourself a woodchuck. I'm walking on one rail. At the time, it was a double line. My buddy was walking on the other rail. He had his rifle, and he was watching ahead. My father was to a soybean field to the north, with a very large soybean field. And the other soybean field to the south is where my brother was. So we have south, my brother walking a soybean field. Up there is the beginnings of the Black River, and where we were at, this ditch is actually part of the Black River because it went alongside the railroad tracks before it went under a culvert. So that area on that side was very brushy, multifloral rows, jungle, trees and stuff, maybe 30 or 40 foot swath of trees and brush. So it was the railroad tracks, railroad ditch / creek / little woods next to that, because it was kind of marshy, and then the field. And we're walking along, heading west into the wind, and it was in the evening, and it was, I believe it was July. And my brother says, "Hey, there's something big moving in front of me in that thick brush." So, we're in Ohio, so we're thinking one of our famous 250, 300-pound Ohio deer are in front of us. So we're kind of keeping an eye out in case something busts out on the tracks. And we're walking down the tracks, and my buddy says, "What the hell is that?" And I look up, and coming out of the side where this little creek went under, this thing was following the brush from that creek, and then that brush kind of thinned out right there. And the big culvert went under the tracks. And coming up from the south side of the tracks, heading north, this creature was walking up. And I'm looking at it, and I says, "That's the thing that my cousin was talking about." So this big thing comes out on the road. It was about, I'm guessing, around 8 feet tall. Probably had to be, I guesstimated to be around 800 pounds. I'll get to that part of the story. So it stepped out on the rails, the southern side rails that I was standing on, and stops and squares up with us, just looking right at us. Its shoulders pointed towards us. And I'm yelling. I told my brother, get up here now. And I yelled at my dad, get up here now. You got to see this. So while I'm yelling for them, I take the rifle off of my back. And it's a 22 Marlin bolt action. They said, you guys got one out there? I don't remember what model it was. I dropped the magazine and I pulled, unloaded it, and I pulled the bolt out. So basically I have a rifle with no action. It's unshootable. You can't hurt anything with it unless you beat on it. So I have this Weaver K4 scope mounted on my rifle. So this thing's 100 yards away. I was looking at it with a 4-power Weaver scope in bright daylight. I looked at it. My brother come up. I handed the gun to him. Then he handed it to my buddy because he had an open sight 22. So this whole thing was less than 2. I don't remember how long it lasted, but each of us got a good 30 or 40-second look at this thing standing on the tracks with a 4-power scope. My dad, he was trying to get up from the north side, trying to cross the railroad ditch. He slipped and fell and went swimming. He never did get up there to see it. So anyways, this thing looked at us, stepped on to the north track, set of tracks. It was just cold staring us down. It's like glaring at us. Best way to describe it. And then it stepped down and went down into that creek bottom. My dad comes up. What's going on? Told him what happened. Where did it go? I said, over there behind that whistle marker. Now, this whistle marker, for those of us in Ohio on a high-speed line, they look like a 6-foot-tall tombstone, maybe 1.5 feet wide. And this one was made out of white sandstone. It had a big W carved into the top. And that, at the time, that big W was painted black. So where was it? I said, it was behind that whistle marker there, probably, 30, 40 yards. And how big was it? I said, it was taller than that whistle marker. So we get up to the whistle marker, it's 6 feet tall. My dad said, how big was this thing? All three of us chimed in. It was huge. So it stepped down into the creek bottom heading north, soft sand. And that little creek bottom was just like where my brother was. It's all multifloral rose, brush, was unfarmable, was all growing up. So down in that creek bottom, down in there, that soft sand, there was approximately, the track was about 20 inches long, maybe 8 inches wide, and was slowly filling up with water. My dad says, my God. So quick think on my part, I took off my tennis shoe that I was wearing, and I took off my sock, and I stepped down next to this track. That track was 1 inch deep in that soft, wet sand. My track was only 1/4 inch deep. Now, at the time when I was in high school, I was 6 foot tall and weighed 200 pounds. So this thing was at least 3 times as heavy as me to get that deep of a track, because that's why I figured you had to be at least around 800 pounds. When we were looking into the rifle scope, the best way for me to describe it for us modern listeners, if you ever seen the Jack Link's Bigfoot, perfect example of what we were looking at. But this is back in 1974. This thing was a charcoal gray color. Its face looked kind of flat and dark, and it was a male. We could tell it was a male. We got to go look at this thing. Like, whoa. And so we saw this thing. And so it was heading north, and that is the west branch of the Black River, that little creek. And it went through the farm next to my cousin's, and then it went to my cousin's through his 500-acre farm. And so we at the time, our hunting safari vehicle, we had an old 1967 Ford van. And so we went down to the van, got in the van, and we figured this thing's heading north, going on my cousin's property. So we drove the van, drove back where the creek crosses his fields back there. And there's like a little side spur that comes in, a little valley that comes in, another little creek comes in. So my dad and brother sat there, And then me and my buddy went to the northern part of the property where the creek went under the fence because we didn't know if he got through there or where it was or if it was still in the creek bottom to the south of us. And we sat there till dark. We didn't see anything. So that was my first sighting of the Bigfoot.
Well,
The creature.
so that Bigfoot creature didn't look anything like the one that your grandpa and great grandpa and uncle had seen, or great uncle.
Well, it was dark on them, and I don't know if you ever messed around with one of those old miner lights. They're pretty bright, but their beam isn't really strong. It doesn't, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's for working underground with a pick in front of your face. You know, it didn't really throw a beam really far. But a lot of guys used to use them in the old days for coon hunting because you could look up in a tree with them and you see the eyes looking at you, shining down. But they were close enough that they could see this gore and everything on it. And he basically, when I showed him that, he says, that's what we saw, you know. So, you know, kind of like Patty, you know, that from that footage is where he drew that conclusion. But
okay, yeah.
So
well, then that's what I'm saying is if you're comparing the one that you saw to the Jack Link's one, that's kind of it's a little bit different.
So the hair was longer than what you can see on Patty. I mean, it had so it's kind of like longer hair up along the head and the neck area down into about where its chest would be. Then the hair gets shorter. Since then, I've had 2 other sightings of these things being in the clear. And that's the way they all seem to look, the ones that I have seen. So the second time I saw this thing was in the clear, and it was the same creature about a month later. I had a cousin who, my cousin, he was a cousin, but he were older, World War II generation. So we called them uncle and aunt because they were older than us. Well, their kids were my age. And basically what happened was my uncle, aunt, and 2 of the sisters, they had 3 girls, went to a wedding out of state. The one closest to my age, my cousin, she stayed home to take care of the farm and the animals. She called me up one night. She says, "Hey, what are you doing this weekend?" Because I used to go out there. My dad used to put me out there for slave labor, I think. You know, learning city boy, learning how to work. Plus, I liked being in the country to begin with. I always had my 22 combat masterpiece on me when I was out there, even when I was hay baling. See a woodchuck, jump down, shoot it, you know. So anyways, she says, "What are you doing this weekend?" I says, "Nothing. Why? What's going on?" She says, "Well, I'm here home alone. And that thing is coming right up next to the house." And I said, "Well, you know, what's it doing?" "Just getting in the garden. It's eating our sweet corn." I said, "What?" He says, "He comes in almost every night between midnight and like 3 a.m. I hear him out there. I smell him. He stinks." And so he's right next to the house, you know, like 20, 30 foot from the house is where this little garden was. And she says, "I'm afraid." I said, "Oh, you know, I got Dad's 410 shotgun and his 22 rifle." He said, "That's all I got. And I'm afraid. And this thing's coming up by the house." And then she mentioned she had her girlfriend there who was a New London High School cheerleader. So, "Oh, yeah, I'll be right there." And so I grabbed I upgraded at the time, you know, working part-time jobs and stuff. I ended up, how would you say, adopting a 357 Magnum to my arsenal. And I had and my deer rifle for Pennsylvania, because we used to deer hunt up here. I had a 30-30 Marlin and old 1894 Marlin. Well, anyways, I says, I don't have any money right now. I have to borrow some from Dad, see if I can get some gas money to come out there. And my dad gave me some money, and my old car that I had back then, it was a 1966 Ford Fairlane, with a three, I think, I can't remember, it was 350. What the heck they used to run on those? Anything, it was a positive traction, really fast car, two-door. Only got about 8 miles to a gallon. So it's like, oh, Dad, I need enough money to get there and back, Gas was cheap back then, but I got enough to get there. So I go out there, get there, just it was late fall. So it was still getting dark around, 7:30, 8 o'clock maybe. And so I get there and, and we're sitting there, and this is going to date me really badly. So me and the girls were playing Parcheesi, sitting at the kitchen table. And it was just about a little bit after midnight. And we're sitting there playing Parcheesi, talking and drinking soda, eating potato chips, and having a good old time. And all of a sudden, this smell permeated the kitchen. And the best way for me to describe this smell, for those who wonders what a spooky Sasquatch smells like, think of the worst homeless person you've ever had in front of you in the line at Walmart, plus a little bit of skunk sprayed on it. You'll get the kind of odor I'm talking about. It burns your nose. And we smell this ungodly smell, and she goes, he's out there. So we run up into her bedroom window that overlooked this little garden, and I had a 6-volt spotlight that I used for coon hunting with me. I said, okay, count of 3, I'm going to light them up. 1, 2, 3, light them up. So there was just starlight. There was no moon. We could barely make out this big black hulking shadow in the garden. And all we seen was this thing looked up at us real quick. And a quick flash of big red eyes. And they looked like bicycle reflectors. They were so big. And he looked up at us like a quarter of a second, turned and ran across the field and got the hell out of there. And so that was, I don't count that as a good sighting. There was something there, but it just happened so quick. We just seen a big black shadowy blur and red eyes, and that was it. So that's the first time that I actually got to get a sense of what these things could smell like. They don't always smell like that. But at that time in my life, when I was out there a lot, helping out on the farm and hanging out, I found tracks, footprints. I didn't ever never thought about making plaster casts. I never heard of it at that time. Footprints, hair, poop. It likes corn. It likes apples. It got into everything. The poop we found. My friend of my father's worked at the Cleveland History Museum. Told him what we had and what we thought we had. So he gave me. He said, "You can borrow this," and he gave me a magnetic mixer with this. It looks like a big pill that you throw inside whatever you're mixing. So that's what mixes the. So we got this big, like, gallon mason jar, put the poop in there, filled it up with alcohol, and mixed it until it came apart. So basically what we were looking for is, I was told at the time, that if it was a bear, you would find hair in it. Because bears are like big raccoons or a dog or anything. They lick themselves. And we would find hair in it, and you know it was a bear. So we dissolved this poop in this jar, and then we poured it through a filter, like a strainer, kitchen strainer, to see what we got out of it. And there was no hair. We found apple seeds, peach pits, which was really impressive because whatever this thing was actually chewed the peach pits, just like bit them in half or quarters. Apple seeds, corn, that looked like raspberry or maybe blackberry seeds, and a substance which we couldn't identify that kind of looked like a fibrous sweet potato. So I'm thinking of some sort of tree root or something that was eating. And so that's what we found in that big experiment there. But that night, that we saw him in the garden. He ran across the road, and so I waited till daylight. I mean, we were so fired up we couldn't go back to sleep. In fact, the girl my cousin's girlfriend never stayed at that house ever again. It scared her very badly. So the next morning, daylight comes because I'm not going out there in the dark. And I backtracked this thing and I went across the road into a big swamp. And so I go out there and look at it. He's got a regular trail right there. These big footprints, like he's coming, like she said, almost every night. So I called my dad. I got back to the house, called my dad. I said, Dad, we saw that thing last night. And he's staying in that swamp. And he's coming right along that half-cut hayfield. They had a hayfield that was started cutting, a little bit of rain, got rainy. So they didn't get it all cut. So it was pretty high by then. It was almost chest high. I said, we could sit right there by the ditch, by this tree line where this thing's, and we probably get a good look at it. So bring some spotlights, and I was kind of rattled because I really realized how big this thing was, seeing it from the bedroom window. And a quick glance at it, so I told my uncle, I says, my dad says, well, you're bringing your brother and my uncle out with me. And he says, do you need anything? And there's a deer rifle that year that my uncle was going to let me use. It was an old 1873 or 1876 Winchester, 3855. I figured, well, the 3855 has a little bit more oomph than the 3030. Because I didn't know, I was scared of it then. I didn't know what it was going to do. So everybody showed up armed, well armed, shotguns and handguns, deer rifles. So we're sitting out in these little like camping chairs out in this field waiting for this thing to come through. And sure enough, it did. So it was walking along the ditch line in the clear. It got almost even with us. So it's only going to be as close as it's going to be to us is probably going to be like 50 feet. And hearing the thump of the footprints, and you hear this thing breathing, I got kind of excited. So I'm sitting there with this 3855 Winchester with nothing in the chamber. I'm thinking, okay, so we're going to stand up and go, surprise, with spotlights. He's going to be like 4 steps away. And I didn't like sitting there with an empty rifle. So the gun was pointed up in the air, but I slowly levered around in the chamber, and this thing heard it. It stopped. My dad swore at me. We hit the lights. We lit it up. And, looking at this thing like 50, 60 feet away, and we could see it from, standing there. It was all charcoal gray cover. Again, kind of looked like the Jack Link's Bigfoot, from what I remember. And that thing turned around and took off through the swamp. That was the second time I seen the same. I'm pretty sure it was the same creature. Well, that creature and other creatures showed up out in that area. 1974, 75, 76, 76, 77. I went and became a grown up and got a real job, and I never really got back out there. And the activity seemed to wane off after that time period also. So I didn't have another sighting until I moved up here in Pennsylvania in 2010. That was in the clear. And that was the closest I ever got to one. But so we're going from Ohio to Pennsylvania now in 40 some years.
Let me ask you, I want to ask you something quick about the Ohio sightings, because, I'm here recording these episodes. I'm in the movie studio here in Ashland, so I'm not too far away from.
No, you're a hour away. New London's right up the road there, and
exactly. And this is a real. I've gotten a lot of sightings and reports from the Ashland area, including recently. There's some new ones, and it seems it's a very, I hate to use the term squatchy area, but there's some real areas between here and up to southern Lorain County that are pretty squatchy, that you could imagine something could hang out and be hidden and have plenty to eat. So
it seemed to disappear during by the time rabbit season and pheasant season come along, it was gone. We didn't find no trace of it. So I believe it just followed the crops around. At this time of year, summer and fall, you have all your crops out and all kinds of stuff for it to eat. And I think that's one thing too. It follows the seasons. Now I have my dad and brother were hunting out the other side of Milan on the railroad out there, woodchuck hunting, and they ran into to something out there. They saw the tracks, and so they're around. 20 years after the fact, I found out he was on the edge of the city of Lorraine, up in the Sheffield Lake area there. I talked to the police chief at the time, and he was telling me that in like 78 or 79, he was in the Lorain County metro parks. They had several sightings there, and there was a Lorain police officer, a Sheffield Village police officer, and a state trooper. All three. It started out as there's Peeping Tom in this area of South Lorain along this metro park there. And so the cops went out. They saw this thing running, so they started chasing it. So they're chasing around, and it's in between these jurisdictions. And the state patrolman happened to hear what was going on the radio. He showed up, and they watched this thing walk across the field. There was this Route 2 there, it goes through there. And they're standing up there on a Route 2 bridge, which I think was, I can't remember which road they were. They were right there. That is, oh my God, been out of Ohio and I forget all the names of the roads and the towns. So they're, this road, it's not Route 83. I can't remember which road it was. Miller Road? I don't remember. But anyway, so it goes, this bridge goes up over Route 2. So they were chasing it, and the last time they seen it, it was heading over there by Route 2. So all three police officers are up on this bridge, and they watched it. It was getting dark. And they come out in this field and walked up to the edge by Route 2, and it was contemplating maybe trying to cross that Route 2. But it turned around and went back down in that river bottom. So, and that was right there in an urban area where houses and everything, this thing came right up. And this is like 20 years later after the fact, we were someplace at some political thing with my dad. There was the police chief, and he goes, "Hey, I got a story for you. I never told you guys." And I said, "What?" And he's telling us that. I'm like, "Wow, that is so cool." He come following me. But yeah, this whole area of Ohio, talking to what I'm trying to think of his name, Stan Gordon. Now his stuff, he documented the invasion of Chestnut Ridge and all that stuff they had going on and over there southeast of Pittsburgh. He's what's his name? The filmmaker, Small Town Monsters. Can't remember his name.
Seth Breedlove.
Now Seth did that one thing he did, the invasion of Chestnut Ridge. That's all Stan Gordon stuff. And I was talking to him, and when I first met him, and we're just like bing, 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 all these points and stuff that he observed. Now Stan, to this day, as far as I know, has never seen a Bigfoot. He's just seen the sign and the tracks and talked to people that seen them. But everything he was talking about, saw that, did that. Yeah, I know. They smell like that. Yeah, been there, done that. So basically, all this activity started in the 70s for whatever reason. And the invasion of Chestnut Ridge involved UFOs with Bigfoot. And his stuff is real crazy. And I think he was one of the early ones that there was the Kecksburg UFO that was on the History Channel. If you watch that, he's on there. That was his investigation that they documented. So he's been doing a lot of paranormal stuff. And in fact, he called me about, we were spirit lights and what we see around here. And he wanted to press my brain, what happened out in Ohio back in the 70s. So basically, Pennsylvania, all through Ohio, almost everywhere in Ohio. In the 70s, there was a bunch of these sightings. And I think they always are there. But what's drawing us all together now is instantaneous contact, internet, cell phones.
Yeah.
If I saw something, I had to run into my cousin's farmhouse and wait until the party line was clear so I could call dad to come on down. And now we have this instantaneous, and you have people running around, and their phones are actually cameras. I didn't have no cameras back then.
Well, and back then, who are you going to call? Who are you going to call to report it? The sheriff, or the police. They're not going to take you serious.
No, they're not going to take you seriously. But then you find out a lot of these guys have seen a lot of this stuff too, and never said anything because they didn't want to end up running the rubber desks for the rest of their career.
So you end up leaving. So you end up retiring, right, and moving to Pennsylvania.
I don't know what the hell's wrong with me. Something's wrong. My legs don't work. I had 30 years in. I started when I was 19. I was 49 when I walked out the door. I couldn't work anymore. What's wrong with me wasn't, they didn't recognize it as a disability back then. And I've been retired 16 years now, I think. Well, after I retired shortly after, the fibromyalgia or whatever's killing me here, wasn't recognized. And so I had 30 years in. I could draw a pension. I was working for the city of Lorain, ran a water plant for 30 years, a foreman in a water plant. And so I had my time in. I could draw a pension. I couldn't work anymore. I couldn't sleep anymore. It was just horrible. So I had to retire. I didn't want to, but I had to. And at the time, Lorain was trying to be, and the best way to describe it is becoming the new East Cleveland with the crime stuff. My old neighborhood, you go in there now. My dad lives on the edge of town. Still not too bad there. But where I lived, my grandparents owned some house in the middle of town. If you go there now, you better go armed because that neighborhood is really, really rough. So we saw this going on at the time. And I told my wife, I says, I always want to live in the woods anyways. Let's get the heck out of here. So we started looking for land, ended up here in the Allegheny National Forest area. I had my one house I lived in, a little rental house that was on the same lot. And I sold them, and we bought 80 acres up here in Northwest Pennsylvania. And it's heaven. That's the best way for me to describe it. I love it up here. And then I moved up here. I rested for a year. Felt good. I was able to walk again without using a cane or crutches. Everything seemed to be going all right. And I got kind of, I'm 49 years old. I'm kind of bored. So I started looking around for, like a part-time job I could pick up. I didn't want to work full-time. So I was looking around for a part-time job, and I tried 2 or 3 little jobs, like delivering prescriptions to, people in the sticks, which worked really good because I got to learn my county up here, running around the back roads and stuff. And then, I worked at Tractor Supply and places, some places I always wanted to try. But the hard floors got to me, and getting it out of that vehicle got to me. So I went back and rested for the winter. And in the spring, I see this advertisement in the paper looking for canoe livery drivers. I'm going, wow, I really sounds really good. So I ended up being a river guide for 10 years for Allegheny Outfitters up here in Warren, Pennsylvania. And I loved it. My God, I wish I could have did that job for a living. It was fun. It was great. Met a lot of people. Was on the river a lot. I mean, I put 100 miles a year on the river sometimes, and it was great. I learned the history up here, local history. So when I had people I was taking out on the river, I could tell them about, Daniel Boone being here and all the Seneca Nation stuff and their culture and their legends and stories and stuff. And so I delved into that and got all in the end of that stuff. And people would always ask me anything about Bigfoot. I said, no, I never seen a Bigfoot up here. I never even heard of them up here. I've been coming into this area since I was 2 years old, and I've never heard anything mention anything about Bigfoot till about after I moved up here. And then the you'll find out when you go into areas like that, the locals will open up to you and you start hearing stuff, which comes to my closest and best sighting of all, working for Allegheny Outfitters. So I'm driving a 15 passenger van down Route 62 south of Starbrick there, going towards Tidiute, Pennsylvania. It's through the National Forest there. I'm driving the van. It's about 6:30 in the morning, kind of foggy along the river. It was like end of May, maybe early June. I don't remember the exact date. So I'm driving through the forest, and there's an area there, and there's an eddy there, which is like a big pool, like in the Allegheny River there. I'm driving next to the river, heading south. And there is a little creek bottom that comes down a little ravine. Then it's called Thompson's Island in the Allegheny River. And then across there, I believe it's Dunn's Eddy, and then the other side, there's another creek valley coming in that way. So those little valleys, little ravines, were actually like animal trail highway. So they would cross the river right there, back and forth. And at this spot, at the tip of Thompson's Island, it's kind of a hill there. So you come up over this hill, and there's always something in the road there. There's always road trail. I mean, I ran over raccoons one time with 15 people in the van, which was really exciting. But I'm not going to put the van in the ditch and take me and 15 other people out. So I ran them over, and like everybody's, oh, the poor coons, But anyways, so there's always something there, either squashed on the road or be a deer standing there. I've seen bears there before. So I come up to that spot and I slow down there. So I'm slowing down, 6:30 in the morning, sun's not up, foggy morning. And there's a guardrail there at the tip of Thompson Island, and coming from the west going east, a Sasquatch is coming up. I'm watching him step over the guardrail. He's going to come out in front of me. I hit the brakes, and I'm hitting the brakes, and this thing's stepping out into the road about 15 or 20 feet away from this thing. And it crosses the road in front of me. Now, I'm looking at this thing like, holy crap. And I'm sitting in a 15 passenger van. So when you sit in this 1-ton, it was a Chevy van, my eyes are about 6 foot off the ground. This thing's walking in front of the van. I can't see its head because the roof of the van was in the way. I had to lean over and look up to see the side of its head. It's crossing the road in front of me, doesn't even acknowledge me and the van being there. Okay, didn't even look. This is a bad Sasquatch. He didn't look both ways before crossing the road. So I'm looking at this thing, and he walks past the van, and I roll up, and I'm looking at his butt. And I'm watching. He steps down in the ditch, and he's going up the ditch and starts going up this ravine. I'm looking at him from 15, 20 feet away. He was across that road in like 3 steps, 30 feet, 35 feet, like 3 steps. This thing is so big. And I'm watching it, and I can see the muscles in its legs, in its butt, in its back, in its shoulders. And this thing is freaking huge. This would make the biggest football player you've ever been seeing. I mean, maybe Andre the Giant might be almost his size, but this thing was bigger. It was just huge. His shoulders were 3.5, maybe 4 feet across. And another thing I noticed again too, it was a male. So it's like, okay, so that's definitely not people, oh, you saw a guy in a ghillie suit. I said, well, I don't know too many guys that big that live around here, number one. Number two, if I was running around the woods, I sure wouldn't have my tender parts out, running around the brush and stuff. And then, we get into the paranormal stuff. Do you want to get into some of that or no?
Well, we're gonna save that for another episode.
Okay.
We're gonna save that for another episode.
Here we go. Police officers with paranormal stuff. So maybe your buddy will give you some stories you could tie in, and it'll probably be just fine.
Well, Dave, yeah, I appreciate you. I'm thankful that Mary connected us, and I appreciate you sharing literally a lifetime of experience with Bigfoot. These are some of the best stories, especially knowing that the ones in Ohio just took place down the road from where I'm sitting, and I gotta go climb in a car here and drive home and
there you go.
pass through.
If you do hit one, try to hit the trailing leg. Don't kill him. Just break his leg so you can track him down.
Okay, listen, I got news for you. I'm not tracking him down. I'm calling somebody. I'm not.
You find it someplace where you don't want to be. Like, we're totally not in Kansas anymore. Where are we? Thank you for having me on, and
thank
we'll
you.
Catch up with you later.
Yeah, thank you for hanging out for a little while, telling your stories.
All right. Thanks, Jane.
Bye-bye.
Hi, folks. This is Phil Garrett, producer of the From the Shadows podcast. If you'd like to hear the extended, nearly 2-hour edition of this week's paranormal episode, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/fromtheshadows. Extended editions are available to Patreon members at the Tier 2 level and above.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the From the Shadows podcast. Until next time, never shy away from the darkness or what may be lurking in the shadows. We are out.